All right, we got Mark Anderson from American Free Press, who is sort of Jim Tucker's sidekick, maybe protege. Is that what you would?
The Bilderberg Protégé would be a good way of describing it, yes.
How long have you been covering Bilderberg, Mark?
This is my third year, Spain, then Switzerland, then now. I've written about it prior to that, but in-person coverage, 3 years.
And tell us about this historic, what do you think of this historic expose from the grassroots this year?
Well, certainly every year the ripples in the pond get larger from the grassroots activists and the alternative media. Some mainstream media begrudgingly reporting it. Today, May 31, 2012, front page Washington Times acknowledged the Bilderberg meeting and reported it with some degree of objectivity, downplaying its importance slightly, but front page, brand name Bilderberg, there it is for all to see. And we're hoping a lot more mainstream press will join along so they can join the European media and the US media blackout once and for all.
Do you think that we're basically going to shame them into covering it this year, or they're going to try to attempt to remain relevant, and that's why some of them might come out and cover it?
A little bit of both, yeah. They'll be shamed or otherwise scared. They're already losing revenues. They're already losing circulation. Their papers are shrinking. They've got to be somewhat relevant, unless they bore their readers to death and look totally irrelevant by comparison with the growing alternative media.
How are they going to explain their past decades of a blackout when all of a sudden now it's front page news, extremely important, everybody's curious about them? How do you think they're going to deal with their denials and cover-ups in the past?
That's difficult to say precisely how they'll deal with it, but they're going to have to do some soul searching and do some real good talking to explain their way out of it. Or just maybe they'll just pick it up and go with it and hope nobody notices that they ignored it since 1954, largely in the US media, whereas European media, at least in the last 10 years, have been far outshining US media and quite aggressive. Not always not always protester, not always for the people opposed to Bilderberg, but nevertheless broad and consistent coverage in Europe that we can only hope will be matched by US media here.
What are your sources inside saying is on the agenda for this year?
Well, I covered the NATO summit. That gives you some indication, because NATO for the first time in 2012 met in a major US city other than Washington, D.C., and NATO's been around since before Bilderberg. NATO is looking at the Afghanistan policy. They're lying. They're saying we're going to be out of there by 2014. We'll be in there till at least 2016. Ron Newman, the former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, confirmed that at a Foreign Policy Association meeting that I covered. They're looking at smart defense, which means fewer troops within the NATO structure. It means more drone strikes. As a Polish foreign minister admitted in a Chicago Council on Global Affairs meeting that I covered. And it means smart defense also means, get this, that NATO will embed itself more in national decision making. In other words, NATO won't sit around and wait for its member states to make independent defense decisions, even though our Congress is being pushed out of the defense and foreign policy decision making. NATO will actually insinuate itself more, according to NATO's own statements and that of NATO's followers and promoters. It will insinuate itself more into national decision making and not leave it to chance. NATO doesn't want to disappear, and they want to have more say-so in how its member states spend defense dollars.
Can you give 2 or 3 examples of inside information that you guys have gotten over the past few years that have then come to pass where the rest of the media, the rest of society was ignorant about, or was even reporting contradictory evidence, such as the time frame for the Iraq War? I know Jim Tucker had some inside sources that said it was going to take place in 2003. Can you give a couple examples of some inside sources of the best examples of what your inside sources have been able to reveal?
Well, what I just said is the most recent stuff coming out of NATO, and NATO brass often send a couple people to the Bilderberg meetings. Certainly, we had already talked about the fact that we would not leave Afghanistan when we were told we would. And I believe Jim Tucker could actually tell you more about this, but I believe we predicted the surge before there was a surge. And Jim's sources tell him that they keep a very close eye on Iran and Syria, and that they want to bring Iran and Syria into the crosshairs more. Not long ago, Jim published a story that said there were basically 7 nations on the hit list of the kind of the Bilderberg empire, you might say. And two nations that have not been hit hard yet that are on that list are Syria and Iran. And notice that right before the Bilderberg meeting, they're notching up the severity of the atrocities, we're told, in Syria. We're told the Syrian government is attacking its own citizens, and that's appearing in the press like crazy, just as Bilderberg's about to meet. And then there's more talk about Ahmadinejad, the Iranian leader, being especially hard line with nuclear policy, which it really isn't true at all. And so I would point out, I'm getting a phone call here, I'll mute it. I would point out that right now, Jim's predictions that they would turn up the rhetoric on Iran and Syria, which he made a long time ago, are now coming to fruition even more right as Bilderberg 212 is happening. I don't think the timing is totally coincidence, although you can't say for sure. So that's a big one.
One more question. Have you been able to get an itinerary for this year, and did they release that? Where do you get that? Because I called Perseus Inc., James Johnson's office, asked for an itinerary. Do they release public itineraries and guest lists, and where do you get those, or do you get them leaked out?
They leak out. They don't really release anything except past tense stuff, and even that is very small. Bilderbergmeetings.org is supposedly an official or quasi-official site, but it's all past tense. It'll have a list from 2 years ago or a year ago. There's been no press releases, no press conferences, no proactive in advance kind of information. So although years ago, as Tucker will tell you, they had toyed with the idea of being more public, they went back to the reclusive, totally hidden stance as much as possible. But again, with mainstream U.S. media begrudgingly acknowledging what the alternative media has been reporting for years, particularly American Free Press, their secrecy is going away. And one wonders why they even bother anymore. Why don't they just split up and have internet teleconferences? Why do they even do this except maybe to rub it in the face of the average citizen? We're going to come into your town and we're going to have a secret meeting, and what are you going to do about it? That's one interpretation.
Awesome. Thanks for your work. I really appreciate it.
No problem. I would add that this is a real turning point. We've got to stay out of a war in Iraq. We've got to stay out of the fight in Syria. We've got to get out of Afghanistan. We've got to draw the line now. And they're going to try and egg us into another war. Hopefully this protest won't just break the U.S. media blackout. It'll end the imperial U.S. state and perpetual war.